Hi, I'm Jenna from So Happy Geek, and I'm going to show you today how to make this foundation piece Quadra-Star. For this quilt block, you will need 4 of these units, and I'll show you quickly in summary how to make them, and then I'll show you in more detail. Basically, the way it works is you've got your piece of calico, and you've drawn all the lines onto it. Now, on the side that's plain, you need to sort of pay attention to where your fabric needs to go, place it, and then crease it on the line between the number 1 and the number 2, and pay attention to where that crease is. And then you take the fabric, in my case white, that you want it to be in that number 2 spot, which is going to be these white bits here, and you put that fabric approximately 1/4 of an inch over that crease. Flip it over, put a pin in the crease to check your seam allowance, make sure everything is lined up correctly, and that's lined up perfectly. Flip it back over, put a couple pins in, and sew that line. When you're done sewing it, you'll flip it over, iron it, trim down that seam allowance, and you're good to go with number 3. And so on until you've got all 7 done. You're going to trim the back 1/4 of an inch away from the line, and that's what it looks like. To show you in more detail how to do this foundation piece block, you'll start with the calico that you've taped down and drawn in all the lines in pencil, and obviously you've got the lines on one side which you're going to sew over, and then on the other side will be your fabric. Now the first piece of fabric, number 1, needs to be face up, okay? And then you need to fold a crease between the number 1 space and the number 2 space so that you have an idea of fabric placement. So you've got your crease, put your fabric about 1/4 of an inch over that crease for your seam allowance, and flip the whole thing over, put a pin right where you'll be sewing, and then if you want to double check that the piece of fabric is going to fill up the whole space and give you the seam allowance, the easiest way to do that is to let it hang down and put the whole thing in front of a source of light. Now in this case I've used a huge piece, so I know that it's going to fill in that number 2 spot. So once you've done that, check your seam allowance to make sure it's about 1/4 of an inch, which that is. And then take the pin out and put it in that way. Now turn your stitch length down, but it doesn't have to be teeny tiny, just a little bit small to keep things in place. And then you're gonna start stitching a couple of stitch lengths away from the line, and then you're going to stitch a couple of stitch lengths on the other side of the line. Press that open, like so. Now, we'll need to get rid of that seam allowance. Make sure the calico is out of the way, and then just take your scissors and it's gone. So that's number 1 and that's number 2. So now we're going to do number 3 on the other side, which is going to be that one. And again, we're going to crease that line between number 2 and number 3. Kind of mark where the crease is. And then we'll put that there, like so. Put a pin in there, and then we'll double check by letting it fall and making sure it's going to cover the whole piece, which it will in this case. It'll be fine. The seam allowance I seem to have gotten right. It's about 1/4 of an inch. So without further ado, go ahead and sew it. Again, I'm going to start a couple of stitch lengths away. Stitch along that line carefully. The better you stay on the line, the more exact your foundation piecing is going to look. Now I'm going to press that open. And then I'm going to cut that seam allowance away so that that's not showing. With foundation piecing, because the fabric is behind, you can actually go down to 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and the foundation will keep things together. So don't worry if your piece ends up being smaller. Now I'm going to fill in space number 4, which is that piece. And I've already made my crease. And I'm going to check it by putting pins in the line between number 3 and number 4, like that. And then I'm going to look at it through the light. And that is absolutely fine. I've got plenty of room there, plus my seam allowance. So we'll flip it back over, pin it in place, and sew down that line. Now I'm going to press it open. And now I can cut the seam allowance away on both of the pieces of fabric. And there's number 4. Okay, so I've gotten the front done and it's all pressed, and now I'm just going to trim it. I drew on lines 1/4 of an inch away when I drew the foundation lines onto my calico, which does make squaring it up a lot easier. So And it's done. That's it.